They thought I was just legacy deadwood. But they forgot that I was the only one with a license to operate their $100 million system. They wanted to streamline the workforce. Let's see how long the company would run when I revoked my operating authority. And you won't believe who begged me to come back in the end. My name is Rachel Kirkland, and until 3 weeks ago, I was the Director of Licensing and Compliance at Voltaris Power Systems, one of the largest energy companies in the Northeast. 12 years I gave to that place. 12 years of meticulous documentation, careful relationship building with regulators, and ensuring our operations never once faced a significant violation. I knew every inch of our compliance systems, every deadline for every permit renewal, and the personal coffee preferences of every inspector who walked through our doors. At 44, I wasn't the oldest person at Voltaris, but I certainly wasn't part of the new guard either. I didn't use TikTok for professional development. I didn't pepper my emails with trendy buzzwords or spend my lunch breaks networking at CrossFit. I did my job, and I did it exceptionally well. Our compliance record under my watch was impeccable, which in an industry as heavily regulated as energy production was worth its weight in gold. But apparently, gold isn't what Voltaris valued anymore. They wanted something shinier, more digital, more buzzword compliant. Enter Tyler Briggs, 33 MBA from an online program he never failed to mention, and a vocabulary consisting almost entirely of disrupt, agile, data-driven, and other corporate speak that somehow impressed our board of directors. His official title was Transformation Specialist, but everyone knew what that really meant: hatchet man. The company brought him in during a period of record profits, not losses, which should have been my first warning sign. This wasn't about improving the business. This was about changing its DNA. I first met Tyler in the elevator. He was staring at his phone, swiping through some presentation with streamlining legacy operations emblazoned across the top. When he noticed me looking, he quickly switched to his email. "Floor," he asked, not looking up. 7, I replied. Compliance and Regulatory Affairs. That got his attention. He looked up, scanning me from head to toe like I was an interesting specimen. "Compliance paper pushing must keep you busy." "The paperwork keeps the lights on," I said, maintaining eye contact. "Literally. We lose the right permits. The whole operation shuts down." He smirked. "Well, there's about 1,000 apps for that now. Probably time to digitize all those dusty filing cabinets. Right." The elevator dinged for floor 7. As I stepped out, I turned to him. "Those dusty filing cabinets contain the only copies of our federal operating licenses with my signature as the authorized representative. But sure, let's put that on an app." The doors closed on his frowning face. I didn't know then that I'd just met the man who would try to erase me from the company I'd helped build. The first sign of trouble came the following week. A company-wide meeting was called Mandatory Attendance. The auditorium buzzed with nervous energy. These kinds of gatherings were rare at Voltaris and usually meant either very good news or very bad news. Gerald Wexler, our CEO, introduced Tyler to thunderous applause from the executive team and polite, confused clapping from everyone else. "Tyler Briggs joins us as our new Chief Transformation Officer," Gerald announced, beaming like a proud father. "He's here to help us modernize, streamline, and prepare Voltaris for the next generation of energy solutions." Tyler took the stage, sleeves rolled up as if he'd been hard at work, though he'd only been with the company for 3 days. His presentation was a masterclass in saying nothing with many words, slides filled with upward trending graphs without labeled axes, stock photos of diverse people pointing at tablets, the word innovation in font sizes that bordered on comical. Then came the slide that made my stomach drop: identifying legacy redundancies. "Every great company evolves," Tyler said, pacing the stage like a motivational speaker. "And evolution means shedding what no longer serves us. We need to identify where we're holding onto outdated processes and, yes, outdated mindsets." His eyes scanned the room and seemed to land directly on me. I sat up straighter. clutching my leather portfolio, the one containing handwritten notes on every major regulatory change in our industry over the past decade. Some of you might be uncomfortable with change, he continued. That's natural. But discomfort is where growth happens, and Voltaris is ready to grow. After the meeting, people gathered in nervous clusters, speculating about what legacy redundancies really meant. I returned to my office, shut the door, and did something I'd never done before. I took home copies of our most critical licensing documentation. Not the publicly available stuff, but the detailed applications, the inspector sign-offs, the amendment histories, and most importantly, the specific language about who was authorized to represent the company for licensing matters. When I'd negotiated my contract years ago, our legal team had been careless. They'd allowed language stating that all operating licenses listing me as the authorized representative would require my signature to transfer or modify. It was supposed to be boilerplate protection against the company making me the fall person for any violations, but it essentially tied the licenses to me personally. I'd mentioned this to legal twice over the years, suggesting we correct it, but they never seemed concerned. Now, I was grateful for their oversight. Over the next few weeks, Tyler's influence spread through the company like a virus. Suddenly, every department needed to justify its processes. People who'd been with Voltaris for decades found themselves explaining basic operations to a man who hadn't bothered to learn how our actual business worked. My department was a particular target. Tyler scheduled a discovery session with my team, which turned out to be a thinly veiled interrogation. So, he said, leaning back in his chair in our conference room, talk me through why compliance needs 14 people. Because we operate 7 power generation facilities across 3 states, each with different regulatory requirements. I explained, trying to keep the edge from my voice. We handle EPA regulations, state environmental permits, FERC compliance, NERC standards. But surely most of that could be automated, he interrupted. There's software for this stuff now. Melissa, my deputy, jumped in. We do use compliance software, Mr. Briggs. But the software doesn't build relationships with regulators. It doesn't interpret changing requirements or negotiate terms. Tyler made a note on his tablet. And how often do these regulations actually change monthly, yearly, sometimes daily, I said, particularly during administration transitions or after significant incidents in the industry. He looked skeptical. Daily seems excessive. Last month, after the Westlake incident, we had to submit revised emergency protocols within 48 hours, I pointed out. My team worked through the weekend to ensure compliance. And that required 14 people. No, I admitted. That particular task required 3 specialists and myself. His face lit up with triumph. So you admit there's redundancy. I took a deep breath. There's overlap for critical functions. That's not redundancy. That's responsible management. When someone's on vacation or sick, we need coverage for essential compliance tasks. But in today's world, Tyler pressed, with cloud collaboration and remote work capabilities, do you really need everyone physically present? Couldn't you consolidate roles? And there it was, the first hint of what was coming. After the meeting, I pulled Melissa aside. Start documenting everything, I whispered. Every approval process, every license condition, especially anything with my name on it. Her eyes widened. You think he's going to? I don't know what he's going to do, I said, but I want us prepared either way. That night, I reviewed my employment contract again. The clause was still there, buried in Section 12.4. All regulatory authorizations, permits, and licenses listing employee as authorized representative shall remain valid only while employee maintains this status with the company, and for a period not to exceed 48 hours following any change in said status, unless properly transferred according to regulatory requirements with employee's written authorization. It was my insurance policy, though I'd never imagined I'd need to use it. The following Monday, I arrived to find my security clearance had been downgraded. I could no longer access the executive floor or certain parts of our document management system. When I called IT, They said the request had come from above, but couldn't provide specifics. I wasn't the only one. Several of my team members reported similar restrictions. People with decades of institutional knowledge suddenly couldn't access the very systems they'd helped build. Then came the reorganization announcement. Tyler had created a new organizational chart, which he revealed with the flourish of a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat. My department had been renamed Regulatory Enablement and was now a subdivision of Strategic Operations, Tyler's department. My title remained, but my direct reports had been reduced from 14 to 3. The rest were either reassigned or placed in a mysterious category called Transition Pool. What exactly is the Transition Pool? I asked during the leadership meeting where this was announced. Tyler smiled thinly. It's an opportunity for talent to find the right fit in our new structure. They'll be assigned projects across departments while we determine optimal placement. And if no optimal placement is found, I pressed. Gerald Wexler, who had been unusually quiet during all of this, cleared his throat. Rachel, we're trying to be thoughtful about this process. No one is being let go today. The emphasis on today wasn't lost on me. After the meeting, I requested a one-on-one with Gerald, who had been my champion when I was first promoted to director. His assistant informed me he was traveling extensively for the next 2 weeks and suggested I speak with Tyler instead. The walls were closing in. That afternoon, Tyler appeared in my office doorway. Got a minute? Without waiting for a response, he sat down across from my desk. Rachel, I want to be direct with you. Your role is changing. I gathered that from the reorganization chart where half my team disappeared. I replied. He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. Look, the energy sector is changing. We need to be more agile, more tech-focused. We're a power generation company. Tyler, our core business is making electricity reliably and safely, not developing apps. He sighed, as if I were a child who couldn't grasp a simple concept. The future is digital transformation. Companies that don't evolve get left behind. And what does digital transformation have to do with gutting the compliance department that keeps our operations legal? We're not gutting anything, he said, his voice hardening. We're optimizing. And frankly, your resistance to these changes isn't helping your case. My case? For remaining in a leadership position, he said. I've been reviewing personnel files. You haven't completed any professional development in digital systems. You don't participate in the company's social media advocacy program. You still print emails. I stared at him, incredulous. I'm responsible for ensuring our $400 million operation doesn't get shut down by regulators. And you're concerned about my social media presence. It speaks to adaptability, he countered. And leadership in 2025 requires adaptability. I leaned forward. Leadership also requires understanding what actually matters to the business. Do you know who signs off on our operating licenses? Do you know what happens if we miss a single EPA deadline? Do you understand the personal liability our executives face if we have a compliance failure? Something flickered across his face, uncertainty. Perhaps, but it quickly vanished behind his practiced confidence. That's why we're not eliminating compliance, he said smoothly. We're modernizing it, and I'm giving you the opportunity to be part of that modernization. What exactly does that mean? For now, you'll transition to a special projects role. You'll support the strategic operations team while we implement the new compliance framework. Translation: I was being sidelined. And my current responsibilities, I asked. We're bringing in some fresh talent from Nexus Utilities. They've implemented an AI-driven compliance system that's reduced their regulatory staff by 60%. I almost laughed. Nexus operates in a single state with a friendly regulatory environment. We operate in 3 states with some of the strictest requirements in the country. Tyler stood up. The decision's been made. Rachel, you can embrace it, or... He left the alternative hanging in the air. When does this transition happen? I asked, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Immediately. Your new office will be on floor 3. HR will help with the move tomorrow. After he left, I sat motionless for several minutes. 12 years. countless nights and weekends ensuring Voltaris stayed in regulators' good graces. Not a single major violation on my watch. And my reward was being demoted too. What exactly? Special projects meant no real responsibility. A holding pattern until they could build a case to let me go. I opened my drawer and pulled out the emergency protocol I'd created years ago, but never expected to use: compliance continuity in crisis. It detailed exactly what to do if our compliance systems were ever compromised. Ironic that I'd be using it because the company itself was the threat. That night, I didn't go home right away. Instead, I systematically went through every critical compliance document, creating copies and detailed notes. I wasn't stealing company property. Everything I accessed was within my legal purview as Director of Compliance. I was simply ensuring I had records of what existed and where. Most importantly, I cataloged every license, permit, and regulatory authorization that listed me as the company's authorized representative. There were 17 major ones, including our primary operating licenses. Each one would become invalid 48 hours after I was no longer in that position, unless properly transferred with my written consent. The next morning, I was escorted to my new office, a converted storage room on the 3rd floor, nowhere near any of the departments I'd need to work with. My personal items had been packed in banker's boxes. My company phone had been replaced with an older model. My laptop now had restricted access to most systems. Your new responsibilities will be assigned soon, the HR representative told me with practiced sympathy. In the meantime, please complete these training modules on our new compliance platform. The training modules were basic tutorials on how to use standard office software programs I'd been using proficiently for years. It was busy work, designed to bore me into quitting. Instead, I used the time to prepare. I updated my resume, I reached out to industry contacts, and I documented every unusual change in procedure since Tyler's arrival. By the end of the week, I'd been given my first special project, preparing for the annual federal inspection that was 8 weeks away. Under normal circumstances, this would have been a major responsibility for my entire team. Now, I was expected to handle it alone, with limited system access, while a 22-year-old intern named Jason was assigned to assist me. Jason was eager but completely inexperienced. He'd been with the company for 3 months and couldn't tell the difference between EPA and NBA. So these guys just come in and make sure we're not, polluting too much, he asked during our first meeting. It's a bit more complex, I explained, trying to hide my frustration. They review our operations, our emissions data, our safety protocols, our community impact assessments, everything that's covered in our operating licenses. Cool. He nodded, typing something on his phone. I've got some great ideas for making this more streamlined. Maybe we could create a TikTok to show the inspectors around virtual tour instead of the real thing. I stared at him. Federal inspectors don't accept TikToks as compliance evidence, Jason. He looked genuinely disappointed. Over the next 2 weeks, I did my best to prepare for the inspection while teaching Jason the absolute basics of regulatory compliance. Meanwhile, I watched as my former team was gradually dispersed. Melissa was reassigned to operational excellence, whatever that meant. 2 of my most experienced specialists took early retirement packages. 3 others were placed in the transition pool, given desk space in a far corner of the building and no actual work. Then came the email that confirmed what I'd suspected was coming. A company-wide announcement of a strategic realignment of talent. Corporate speak for layoffs. 30 people would be let go, including the email specifically highlighted duplicate roles in legacy systems management. I was being fired. They just hadn't told me personally yet. The next morning, Tyler and an HR representative I'd never seen before appeared at my makeshift office. Rachel, Tyler began, his voice professionally solemn. As part of our ongoing transformation, we've had to make some difficult decisions. You're eliminating my position, I said flatly. He nodded. Your role has been identified as redundant in our new structure. We've determined that the specialized compliance functions can be managed through our new digital systems, with oversight from generalist managers. Generalist managers, I repeated. You mean people who don't actually understand compliance requirements? The HR representative stepped forward. We're offering a generous separation package, 3 months salary, extended health benefits, and outplacement services. I looked at the package she handed me. Standard corporate severance, nothing special. Who will be taking over my responsibilities? I asked. We've created a compliance operations team under strategic operations, Tyler explained. They'll collectively manage the regulatory portfolio. And who will sign off as the authorized representative on our federal licenses? A flicker of confusion crossed his face. That would fall to the team leader, I suppose. Marcus Hendricks. Marcus was a project manager who joined the company 8 months ago. He had zero experience in regulatory compliance. I see, I said calmly. And when does this separation take effect? Immediately, the HR representative said. We'll need your badge and company devices before you leave today. I handed over my badge and phone. I assume I'll receive the formal separation agreement by email. Yes, within the hour, she confirmed. You'll have 7 days to review and sign it. I stood up, gathering my personal belongings into one of the banker's boxes. Is there anything else? They seemed surprised by my calm acceptance. No, that's all, Tyler said. Security will escort you out. As I was walked to the exit, I passed Melissa in the hallway. Her eyes widened in shock, but I gave her a small, knowing smile. She would understand what was coming. At home, I opened my personal laptop and reviewed the separation agreement they'd emailed. Standard non-disparagement clauses, release of claims, return of company property provisions. Nothing about transfer of regulatory authorizations or licenses. They had forgotten or never knew about the most critical part of my role. I sent a brief, professional email accepting the separation and thanking the company for the opportunity to have served for 12 years. I attached the signed agreement, surrendering all claims against Voltaris. Then I sent a second email, this one to the regulatory agencies that governed our operations. It was a formal notification that I was no longer employed by Voltaris Power Systems and therefore no longer serving as authorized representative on the 17 licenses and permits bearing my name. The clock was now ticking. They had 48 hours. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat back, and waited for them to realize what they'd done. The first sign that Voltaris had discovered their mistake came exactly 30 hours after my termination. My phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Hello, Rachel Kirkland speaking. Rachel, it's Marcus Hendricks. His voice had the tight, controlled panic of someone trying to sound casual while their world implodes. How are you doing? I'm well, Marcus, enjoying some unexpected free time. What can I do for you? I've been reviewing the compliance documentation for our federal operating licenses, and I noticed something concerning. Oh, I kept my tone neutral. It seems that you're listed as the authorized representative on several critical permits, and there's some language about transfer requirements that I'm trying to understand. Yes, that's correct. All major operational licenses list me as the AR. It's been that way for about 9 years. There was a pause. The thing is, we need to update those records immediately. The system is flagging them as potentially invalid since your departure. That would be accurate, I confirmed. Section 12.4 of my employment agreement specifies that authorizations remain valid for 48 hours after my status change, unless properly transferred with my written consent. Another, longer pause. We'll need to get that consent from you right away. Can you come in tomorrow morning to sign the transfer documentation? I'm afraid I have prior commitments tomorrow, I said, watching my neighbor's cat sun itself on my porch. But I'd be happy to review any documents you email over. This really needs to be done in person. Rachel, these are federal documents with specific signature requirements. That's true. I agreed. They do require wet signatures and notarization in some cases. Perhaps Wednesday would work. By Wednesday, they would have been operating without valid licenses for over 24 hours, a serious violation that could trigger automatic inspections and potentially significant fines. Wednesday isn't. Look, can we be frank here? Marcus's professional veneer was cracking. We need this handled immediately. The system is already flagging compliance warnings. I understand the urgency, Marcus, but as I'm no longer an employee, I need to be thorough in reviewing what I'm being asked to sign. These authorizations carry personal liability, as you know. He didn't know, of course, that was the problem. What if Tyler called you directly, or even Gerald? I'm happy to speak with anyone from Voltaris about this matter, I said, but I'll need proper time to review the transfer documentation before signing anything. After hanging up, I silenced my phone and went for a long walk. When I returned, I had 6 missed calls, 3 from Marcus, 2 from Tyler, and 1 from Gerald Wexler himself. There were also 4 emails, each more urgent than the last. The final one, from Gerald, cut straight to the point. Rachel, I've just been informed about the license authorization issue. This is a critical matter that requires immediate resolution. Please call me as soon as you receive this. We need to address this before it impacts operations. I drafted a careful response. Gerald, I understand this is an urgent situation. I take my responsibilities as an authorized representative very seriously, which is why I properly notified all relevant regulatory agencies of my change in status, as required by law. I'm open to discussing a proper transfer of these authorizations, but I'll need time to review all documentation and ensure everything is in order. I have availability on Wednesday at 2 p.m. if you'd like to meet. By Wednesday, all 17 authorizations would have officially lapsed. I slept surprisingly well that night. Tuesday morning, I awoke to find an email sent at 3:17 a.m. from Tyler, with Gerald and the entire executive team copied. Rachel, we need to resolve this authorization issue today. Our systems are showing critical compliance alerts. Legal has prepared the transfer documentation, and we can have a notary ready whenever you can come in. Please respond ASAP with your availability. This is affecting our operational capability. At 9:30 a.m., my doorbell rang. When I opened it, I found Gerald Wexler himself standing on my porch, looking like he hadn't slept. Behind him was a woman I recognized as Patricia Lynn, Voltaris's chief legal officer. Rachel, Gerald said, forcing a smile. I hope we're not intruding, but this authorization situation has become critical. We need to get this resolved immediately. I invited them in, offering coffee, which they both declined. Our operations center is receiving automated compliance warnings, Gerald explained, sitting stiffly on my couch. By midnight, we'll be operating in direct violation of federal regulations. That's concerning, I acknowledged, though I'm surprised this wasn't addressed during the transition planning. Patricia shifted uncomfortably. There appears to have been an oversight regarding the specific language in your employment contract. Section 12.4. I nodded. I did mention it to legal twice over the years, suggesting it should be revised for clarity, but I was told it wasn't a priority. Gerald cut to the chase. Rachel, what do you need to sign these transfer authorizations today? I considered them both carefully. First, I'd like to understand why my position was eliminated if my role was so critical to operations. Gerald glanced at Patricia, who gave him a subtle nod. That decision was made based on incomplete information, he admitted. Tyler's transformation plan prioritized certain metrics without fully understanding the regulatory complexities of our business. I see, and now that you understand those complexities, Gerald leaned forward. We'd like to offer you a new position, Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs, reporting directly to me. Full reinstatement of your benefits and seniority, plus a 15% increase in compensation. I raised an eyebrow. That's quite a change from redundant legacy system manager. Patricia spoke up. We recognize that mistakes were made in the reorganization process. Your expertise is clearly essential to Voltaris's operations. And Tyler's transformation plan will be recalibrated, Gerald said carefully, with more input from department leaders who understand our core operations. I sat back, considering their offer. It was tempting: more money, more authority, vindication, but something didn't feel right. I appreciate the offer, I said finally. But I need to consider it carefully. This isn't just about a title or salary. It's about respect for expertise and institutional knowledge. Gerald's professional mask slipped. Rachel, we don't have time for negotiation. By midnight, we'll be operating illegally. We could face millions in fines, operational shutdowns. I'm aware of the consequences. I interrupted. I've spent 12 years protecting Voltaris from exactly these situations. That's why I'm surprised my role was considered dispensable. Patricia tried a different approach. What would make this right for you, Rachel? We're prepared to be flexible. I thought about it. I'd need several things. First, a public acknowledgement that the compliance and regulatory functions are essential to our operations, not legacy systems to be disrupted. Second, reinstatement of my entire team, with apologies to those who were forced into early retirement. Third, a seat on the executive committee, so this kind of misjudgment doesn't happen again. Gerald looked pained, but nodded. We can work with that, but we need you to sign these authorizations today. I'll need to review them first, I said, reaching for the folder Patricia had brought. Every single page. These carry personal liability for me, even after I sign them over. How long will that take? Gerald asked, poorly concealing his desperation. At least 3 hours, I said. These are complex documents. We'll wait, he said firmly. I spent the next 3 hours meticulously reviewing every document while Gerald made anxious phone calls in my kitchen and Patricia texted continuously. I found several concerning discrepancies that would need to be corrected before I could sign. The transfer documentation for the EPA operating license lists incorrect facility specifications. I noted. And the FERC authorization has outdated emergency contact information. These will need to be revised. Gerald's face fell. How long will that take? Legal will need to prepare new documents. Then I'll need to review them again. That could take days, he protested. Yes, I agreed. Regulatory compliance is thorough and exacting. That's its nature. Gerald rubbed his temples. What if you came back immediately, today, as interim authorized representative while we prepare the proper documentation for either transfer or your new role? It was the scenario I'd been waiting for. That would require rescinding my termination completely. I'd need to be fully reinstated to my previous position first. Done, he said without hesitation. I'll have HR prepare the paperwork immediately. By 3 p.m., I was back at Voltaris, badge reactivated, systems access restored. The compliance warnings were cleared by 4 p.m. after I logged into the regulatory systems and verified my status as active. Gerald kept his word. An email went out to the entire company announcing my return as the new Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs and Compliance, reporting directly to the CEO. It included a paragraph about the critical importance of regulatory expertise to our operations and renewed commitment to compliance excellence. Tyler avoided me entirely that first day back. When we finally crossed paths in the hallway the following morning, he gave me a tight nod and quickened his pace. Within a week, my team was being reassembled. Melissa returned from her brief exile in operational excellence. Calls went out to the early retirees with offers to return as consultants. The transition pool was dissolved entirely. 2 weeks later, I attended my first executive committee meeting. Gerald introduced a new agenda item, compliance integration in strategic planning. Recent events have highlighted the fundamental importance of regulatory compliance to our operations, he announced. Going forward, all strategic initiatives will include a compliance impact assessment before implementation. Tyler, still present but noticeably subdued, stared at his tablet throughout the discussion. After the meeting, Gerald asked me to stay behind. I want to apologize personally, he said once we were alone. I should have paid closer attention to the transformation plan. I let myself get caught up in buzzwords without considering the practical implications. Disruption sounds exciting until you're actually disrupted, I observed. He smiled ruefully. Indeed. Though I have to ask, did you know exactly what would happen when they terminated you? I knew there would be consequences, I admitted. The extent and timing, I couldn't be certain. But I'd reviewed my contract carefully and understood the implications. Why didn't you warn them you could have pointed out the license issue before leaving? I met his gaze steadily. Would you have warned someone who called your expertise legacy deadwood and your position redundant? He considered this, then shook his head. I suppose not. As I gathered my materials to leave, he asked one last question. What would you have done if we hadn't come to you, if we'd tried to fix it without bringing you back? I smiled. I would have accepted a position with Thermatech Renewables. They offered me a role as Senior Director of Compliance 3 days after Voltaris let me go. His eyebrows shot up. Our biggest competitor? The very same. They were quite interested in someone who understood Voltaris's operations so thoroughly. Thank God you didn't take it, he said with feeling. Not yet, I replied lightly. But I keep their offer letter in my desk drawer, just in case anyone decides expertise is overrated again. As I walked back to my restored office, now larger and with a window, I passed the former storage room where I'd been briefly exiled. It had a new occupant, Tyler, surrounded by boxes, his monitor displaying what looked like a resume template. Some disruptions are necessary after all. 6 months later, Voltaris underwent another reorganization. This time, I helped design it. We created a streamlined but robust compliance framework that integrated digital tools while preserving essential expertise. We did reduce headcount by 1. Tyler Briggs departed to pursue other opportunities. The day after he left, a sticky note appeared on my monitor. It read, "If anyone asks who holds the licenses, tell them to check the records." It wasn't signed, but I recognized Melissa's handwriting. I keep it framed on my desk to this day, right next to my expanded operating license, which now includes a clause requiring any authorized representative to have at least 5 years of industry compliance experience. Some lessons need to be permanently documented.